Volcanic, and overall I think this is about one of the easier King's Rest runs that we could possibly get affix-wise. But let's see how they do as game number 1 is ready to go in our upper semis.
So, King's Rest, yeah, I think Bursting, Volcanic, Fortified definitely not the most difficult affix combination, but it can still cause some problems here with Bursting, especially because of those minions of Zul. They will apply Bursting, and then you also have the droplets in Machimba's room. We'll see how those teams handle that Bursting stacking. Also, this first room, depending on how big they pull, definitely can cause some problems as well with Bursting.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of teams opt to deal with the first set of minions at various times here, but it'll be interesting with those Bursting stacks coming in. Whether they have to adjust their timing. They are going to start off with a bunch of bursting stacks here right off the bat from this this huge spawn of minions duel. So that is going to be 6 stacks of bursting on the entire group as both teams are now executing a massive pull, pulling the entire room all at once here. They have to let those Deathly Chills through on their tanks because they need to save their kicks for those Shadow Bolt volleys, which will be pretty lethal at this plus 19 fortified level.
Yeah, this is such a scary pull for them to do because of those casters, those Witch Doctors, and the Deathly Chill, even though you can spell reflect some of them, but there's 3 of those Witch Doctors that just constantly cast Deathly Chill, and that's why we see the tanks actually starting to kite once their shield wall drops here, and now those mobs need to die, because if you still have a Deathly Chill cast going through, this can cause huge problems, as we see Ethical now finishing off this pull, and well done, well executed.
Yeah, unfortunately,
by them.
Goosy Bad were unable to kill, so one of the Witch Doctors didn't really fully come into the AoE pile, and if you can see that one is still alive there. And that has really slowed down this pull for Goosy Bad. That was the one by the exit to this room, and that's going to be slowing them down in their progress here. Meanwhile, Ethical, already underway here onto the first boss. They've pulled some animated Guardians with it, as we've seen a lot of teams do in this area. That's going to earn them a little bit of count, and that's going to open up the opportunity for the healer to go and grab the next 2 once they start getting to the Gauntlet room after this boss.
Yeah, that's just a very efficient way of getting this extra percentage to pull those 4 Guardians on top of the boss and then the Gauntlet later on. We've seen almost all teams do this so far. It is, of course, a lot more damage here in the tank. Having 2 fortified Guardians hit you while also having to tank the boss. Those Guardians also enrage at 50%, but it is dispellable, so the Hunter can actually dispel this effect off.
Yeah, that Soothe Enrage Dispel thing that Hunters get, very useful, even when Raging isn't active. In some dungeons, and this is certainly one of them. Both teams on the same boss here. It looks like Goosy Bad may be catching up a little bit. They've got the Golden Serpent. They're about 25% health behind on it. Oh, but unfortunately, Hunte is going down there.
Oh.
Didn't quite catch what happened in there, but it looks like he's dead in a pool of gold. That may have just been the Spit Gold dot taking him down. Looks like it's going to be a Battle Res, though, that gets him back on his feet nice and quick. That is not going to cost them too much time, but it is going to cost them that Battle Res, which is a very valuable resource.
Yeah, not having the Battle Rest later might cost them, but we see Hunter again getting the Spit Gold debuff now. It is a fortified setting, and none of the affixes make the Spit Gold be worse. There's no Grievous or anything like that. So interesting to see that Hunter actually went down here on Goosy Bad's side. But Ethical, on the other hand, they already finished off the boss here. They're in fact finished off the boss before they finished off the Guardian, so they had to do a little bit more damage once the boss was already dead. Because of this fortified setting, those Guardians just have so much HP. And now you see Chompy actually being off, pulling those other 2 Guardians on top of this next Gauntlet.
Yeah, we are going to see some minions coming in here with that Bursting affix. Very important to note. Also worth noting, the Gauntlet room in King's Rest in the MDI has a fixed pattern, so it'll always be this pack first, and then it'll go around the room in a counterclockwise order. So there's not any element of randomness as to which of these packs activate in which order, which could throw a wrench into a team strategy.
So Chompy actually got feared, unfortunately, as he was pulling those 2 Guardians. He did manage to come back now, though, so nothing happened after the fear. They will also get the Bursting stacks from these Shadow of Souls, on top of also getting the Bursting stacks from the pack that they're pulling. So this might be dangerous. They have to be careful to not roll the Bursting, and good job on them for stopping the damage on these low HP mobs here, because if they would have been rolling those Bursting stacks, that definitely could have caused some deaths.
That is very lethal. Anytime you extend a Bursting stack that has more than a couple stacks on it, and you refresh it, once it's already done some damage, that really quickly adds up. It eats through the healer's resources, and it just means that the damage it does is so high. They did a good job there, though, of minimizing the impact of that.
Yeah, I agree. As Goosy Bad is now doing the same thing, Hante is coming back now to the group with those Guardians and also the Minions of Soul. They also got to be careful now for them, but because Goosy Bad actually got the mobs a little bit later, they already had the mobs from the pack down, so they don't have to be careful on their side with those bursting stacks because they can't really be rolling them. But now they gotta be careful because they have to deal with this Guardian pack and the next Gauntlet Trash group. This is one of the most difficult ones because you have the Lightning AoE that needs to be interrupted by a knockback, and then on top of that you also have the Whirling Axe Barrage, which does a lot of damage on a 45.
Yeah, they're pretty much just resigned to taking the damage from that. You know, there are ways to avoid it with line of sight, or you know, you can delay it with stuns, but in this kind of MDI key, it's just too costly in terms of the timer to do those sorts of strategies. So they're just going to make Hante and Chomp heal that, respectively, for these teams. Ethical here. A little bit ahead now. They've kind of opened up a bit of a lead as they're moving on to this 3rd out of 4 of the Gauntlet pulls. Meanwhile, Goosy Bad still cleaning up this last one. Look, so they've killed that pack before killing these Guardians, and that's good because that's going to start the timer for the next pack spawning. So that's going to help them get a little bit of that time back.
Yeah, that's why we see a lot of teams not actually focusing these Guardians, even though it's a little bit riskier to keep them up all the time because of tank damage, of course, and also having to dodge the frontal. But by finishing off the Gauntlet mobs, as you said, it will start a timer for the new ones to spawn. And this, unfortunately, is gated, this room here, and you just can't move on until you cleared all of them. And that's why you just want to make sure you keep that on rolling before you kill those Guardians. Well, Ethical, they're already waiting for the last trash group to spawn, so Ethical definitely slightly ahead. It's not a big time advantage, but if you also consider the 5 seconds death timer on Goosy Bad's side, it will add up to quite a bit.
Yeah, something like maybe 30 seconds, maybe 40. It's not the end of the world. You know, one mistake could close it, or just Goosy Bad playing more efficiently for the rest of the dungeon, doing it in one fewer pull. But it is certainly a lead that Ethical has opened here. Really starting from that very first pull, which they were able to execute maybe 30 seconds faster than Goosy Bad could. It was a really impressive, efficient cleave display from Ethical on that very first pull of the dungeon.
Definitely. And now I think how they pull Machimba's room will also be really important for both of those teams because of bursting, it will be very difficult to pull all of the droplets on top of Machimba because there's just some class here who don't have immunities, who can't lift all of these bursting stacks, especially the healers, the Mistweavers. So there might be some interesting strats where we see them maybe outranging the bursting stacks and then coming back in. Depending on how well they play the Machimba room, that might definitely also make up some of those seconds. So we'll see how both of these teams handle it. But first we see Ethical actually dealing with the
right, whereas Goosy Bad are deciding that they are just going to skip this. It looks like maybe with Shadow Melds and Vanishes and Feigns and stuff, because I saw a Pet get dismissed here, although they may just be shrouding. Alright, yeah, they're just going to use their Shroud here. So they are not dealing with Samrak Beckoner of Chaos. They will be killing that enemy with King Dazar at the end of the run. We'll see if they end up doing that thing where you activate 2 obelisks at the same time in another 5 minutes or so. That's something that we saw. That was kind of a differentiation point between teams last weekend in King's Rest. It looks like we may see these two teams having a different answer to that question as well. Both of them now moving into this room, pulling all this trash at once. Question is if after those first entombs they choose to go into that boss fight. If they do, it is going to be very dangerous because of those 16 bursting stacks when all those fluids die. But they have hunters who can turtle, they have rogues who can cloak, and they have death knights who can use anti-magic shell, assuming they can put the anti-magic shell up before the bursting stacks come out. And that'll mean that only 2 people will have those bursting stacks. You can see handled fairly effectively from Goosy Bad there. The turtle came out a little bit late, but that's okay. It still provided a little bit of damage reduction. Ethical trying to execute the same thing here. We don't see the bursting stacks coming out quite yet. It's getting...
Well, that just looked insane on Goosy Bad's side. I mean, they had so many stacks. I couldn't even... Definitely more than 10. I didn't see the exact number. But Shape, unfortunately, going down. Air going down as well on Ethical's side here. They only have 1 battle rest. And they need to use an engineering rest because their DK died, unfortunately. And they will only 1 player up. At this point, it's going to be difficult for them to finish this off. As also an ad spawned and casted the AoE. So this is going to be a full teamwork.
When this pull goes wrong and those ads are still alive during the boss fight, then Entomb can start to get really, really nasty, and I think that's what we saw happen there. after those two players died. So that is going to be a full wipe from Ethical. The ball is now firmly in Goosy Bad's court. They certainly have the advantage here, as that a wipe in King's Rest in a dungeon like this is going to be accompanied with like a 3-minute run back and reset of that pull. Luckily, they didn't rely on Shroud on Ethical's side. They can just go back into that Awakened portal to catch back up to where they were. But still, this is not good. This is really, really bad news for Ethical.
It looks so clean as well on Goosy Bad's side. It looked so easy, right? But the amount of bursting stacks they had there, if they didn't actually deal with all of those bursting stacks perfectly, it would have caused the same disaster as we saw on Ethical's side. So Goosy Bad doing such a great job dealing with all of those bursting stacks at the same time, making sure all of the mobs die at the same time so you don't have any of the bursting stacks rolling, because if you start having 12 stacks rolling into 13, rolling into 14, there's no way anyone can survive this because your immunities just don't last so long. And of course the healer can't keep himself up as long either. So very well done by Goosy Bad, as they're now moving on to the next trash group.
Yeah, so now we're moving into this hallway. A lot of teams have different speeds with which they pull this hallway. Let's see what Goosy Bad can come up with here. Running in, getting the double reflect there. Both those Hex Priests start their cast at the same time. So they're able to reflect both of the Spectral Bolts onto them, and they are going to pull this entire hallway here. That kind of makes sense. The affixes are fairly favorable for this, although bursting is going to be a little bit sketchy at the end of this pull. We see Anti-Magic Shell used a little bit early here. That's probably going to fade before the bursting stacks start to come out. And that is going to mean damage on everybody in Goosy Bad side. Let's see if Hunte can keep them up through this.
I mean, this is a pretty crazy pull because it is Fortified, and Fortified alone is causing these mobs to be so dangerous. If you have all of those casts coming off, you have the Spectral Bolts, you have the Frost Shock coming through. On top of that, you have the Healing Totem that you need to deal with, and you also have the Berserker just leaving those bleeds behind on the tank, or preferably on their Hunter pet. So well done on them for executing this pull. They did have their Bloodlust ready, but chose not to use it. So I assume they either want to use it for the last boss with the Awakened mobs, or they want to use it for the mini-boss, but I think they're just going to save it for the last boss. And Ethical having another wipe, unfortunately.
Yeah, when it rains, it really pours here for Ethical. This room is not being friendly to them. It's a difficult room, especially with bursting active, but this is really, at least this time they have some wipe recovery. This time they were able to get that meld into Maserez coming out, although unfortunately it looks like some of their team have released, and so they're going to have to wait for those members to get back to the room. That is tragic for Ethical.
At this point, they might just have to... I'm not sure, maybe they should use their Bloodlust, because at this point there's no way they can get their the timer that they were practicing for. This is something that we've been talking about as well, right? If you have a mistake, if something goes wrong in your dungeon, how well can you adapt to this mistake, and how well can you change your strategy around your different cooldowns now? And Ethical making this same pull again after already wiping the first time without actually having their defensives ready that they're supposed to be, definitely means like Ethical was not doing so well at adapting their strategy. So now they have to go slower, and now they definitely, I don't know, a couple of minutes behind, maybe like 5, maybe
more,
even more
yeah.
at this point.
We can see Goosy Bad here executing this, excuse me, this double Awakened pull, which is pretty cool. So there's those two obelisks that are like right next to each other. You just activate them both at once. It's a little bit tricky. They did have to deal with 8 stacks of bursting there at the same time, but they were able to get through that, and now they're going to be dealing with 2 fewer enemies on King Dazar. They're just going to have Urgroth and Samrek. Urgroth and Samrek, the 2 hardest ones probably, but you know, it's still only 2 of them, so they should be able to deal with that without too much difficulty. So as soon as this goes down, they are basically just going to have a couple of small trash pulls, Shadow of Zul, and 2 bosses separating them from this map 1 victory. Unless something goes horribly wrong for them multiple times, that is theirs to lose.
Yeah, they should definitely know at this point that the other team did wipe twice. So at this point, they can really just maybe do a saver pull than they were planning to, or maybe commit some different kind of defensives, do everything a little bit slower as they planned. Now, we've heard some other MDI teams before that they were actually not even watching the other team, and they just played their strategy no matter what happened. Now, we'll see what Goosy Bad does, but at this point, in King's Rest specifically, there's not really that much you can do slower because it's a very straightforward dungeon. So I very highly... they're not going to go all the way back and kill the Awakened mobs or something like that. So I assume they're probably not even going to change their strategy all too
sometimes,
much.
you know, trying to make your strategy easier ends up actually making it harder, because now you're spending time thinking about, like, okay, how is this different than how we practiced? And then you're like, all right, well, we don't actually have our cooldowns for this like we normally do, and everything just kind of gets scuffed if you are not, if you're not,
Sure.
you know, if you're on track to do what you have practiced, which Goosy Bad certainly look like they are doing, then it's difficult to justify changing that up unless there is a really aggressive pull that you can easily split into two or something, or like an extra obelisk you could activate before the last boss. I don't really think there's really much opportunity for that, as you were saying in King's Rest, though. So I think they're just gonna do their thing, and you know, they have a little bit of room for error now. They have room to probably wipe once and still be okay. Although, in King's Rest, even one wipe this late into the dungeon can start to be pretty bad. If they wiped to this boss, that would maybe cost them like 5 or 6 minutes. It is really brutal because your graveyard doesn't update and you haven't killed the mobs to give you the flying back thing. So you're starting from the beginning of the dungeon. You have to go back through all the stuff that you shrouded and stuff.
Yeah, that's a long run back from the entrance to this boss, specifically with the not having the skip, as you mentioned. But we see Goosy Bad not having any sort of mistake. And to be honest, I think it's very difficult to wipe on this boss on a fortified setting after Kula is already dead. Kula is like the most difficult boss to deal with. And it's not even that difficult if you just get rid of a lot of the access by using some of your racials, like the dwarf racials we see on the rogue, for example, or using turtle in the right moment. And actually dwarf on Hante as well.
They all have the ability to stop this except for Cryptix, their DK, which is good, you know. And Cryptix can even shadow meld if it's aimed at him and have it target somebody else, but I assume they're probably not bothering with that kind of stuff, because really, you know, it's not too much of a problem for 1 or 2 of them to go out. It's when 3 or 4 of those start going out on, you know, and really exhausting your defensives and your healers' defensives that it starts to get bad.
Yeah, and we see they still are holding on to this Bloodlust, so at this point it seems very likely that they are saving it for the last boss with the Awakened mobs, which makes sense because they have the Tank Buster and the Fear Awakened mobs, which are 2 very difficult ones to deal with, and that's why they just want to have this Bloodlust to get rid of them quickly, while the boss itself also has some dangerous mechanics to deal with, even on a fortified setting. And now they do a pretty big pull as they pull 3 Berserkers on top of each other.
If I'm not mistaken, this is all that they need. After this, they will be able to just Shroud to Shadow Azul, and then they will do King Dazar with 2 Awakened enemies, and that will be the end of their run. They do have to be a little bit careful there. Ring of Peace doing a good job there, but wow, everybody getting pretty low.
That's a lot of stacks.
Yeah, that's a lot of stacks of that bleed coming out. Stoneform used there to remove those bleed stacks. Very effective racial in King's Rest. There are just so many things that it can deal with in this dungeon, even for a tank. In fact, especially for a tank against those Berserker bleeds. They're now going to Shroud through. Have to wait for this little gate to fall so they can now go and fight Shadow Azul. It is fortified, so there's an argument for lusting Shadow Azul, but I believe that they will not be doing that given there are 2 Awakened enemies waiting at King Desire.
Yeah, and Shadow Azul did get nerfed a little bit, so a little bit easier than it used to be in the past. It still does a lot of magic damage with that Shadow Barrage, as you can see. They're probably gonna commit a lot of defensive cooldowns here to keep the tank alive, the Proud Warrior. Hunter also probably doing a lot of HPS to keep him alive here, and they want to use maybe some of their offensive cooldowns to get this mob done faster. Now you can also see this AoE zone that just spawned here on the right of the screen. This one can be outranged, so that's why no one really goes inside to soak it. If it spawns close to the boss, which can happen, then somebody probably wants to soak it, because this mob does not move fast at all because it's a caster. So if the zone spawns right next to a mob, then you want to have a melee or the tank just step into it.
Yeah, good job there from all their melee players as well, standing behind Shadow Azul. Shadow Azul, I think the only mob in BFA dungeons to have a parry arc in front of him. So if you're hitting him from in front, then it'll parry you sometimes. It's bizarre, but they did a good job of minimizing the damage loss to that. Cryptix saving looks like all cooldowns here, so we're going to have Army and Apocalypse and Unholy Frenzy all coming in at the end here. Not a huge amount of targets, so we're not expecting to see millions of DPS, but I think we can still expect to see a reasonable burst here coming out on pull against King Dazar and these 2 awakened enemies.
Yeah, so we'll see how to deal with those, as we have the Bloodlust being popped now by Goosy Bad. Now, this Tank Buster with the Spirit Breaker definitely needs to be avoided somehow. Usually we have the Hunter Pet taunted off, use the defensive, on the pet to make sure the pet doesn't die, or if it dies, just make sure you revive the pet so you can taunt it again, because having this Spirit Breaker, the tank debuff on the tank, on top of also having to deal with all the other mobs, is definitely
When one goes
scary.
through.
And then you also have the Fear mob going out. Yeah, we see actually a debuff right now on the Proud
That
Warrior
is so
here.
rough on this fight, but it looks like they're going to be okay. Yeah, I don't see the usual core hound that we see. I don't know exactly what breed of pet Kevin has here for Goosy Bad, but the core hound really good because it can do that taunt and it has a pretty low cooldown on a defensive for itself. Looks like they might just be planning to just face tank all of those Spirit Breakers, though. We'll have to see what comes out. Should be another one queuing up in just a couple seconds here. There it goes. Yeah.
He still got his shield wall
It's just
available
going-
as well. He
taking
doesn't
it-
need any
yeah,
of this defensive
right
stuff.
to the tank. That is impressive. Very scary mob there.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, in the end, it will definitely increase your DPS to have the hunter not taunted off. If your tank can somehow survive this, then you don't want to use the hunter pet because it will decrease his damage from the hunter to needing the pet, taunting it off, maybe even going down. And the pet going down will cause the hunter to cast the revive pet, which will cause you damage as well, especially during Bloodlust. So if your tank can survive it, like we just saw on Goosy Bad's side, then you want to make sure that the hunter does not have to do
Can't
that
argue
job.
with those results. There goes the terrifying fear, though, from Tazala. Tazala usually something you want to try and nuke down as quickly as possible once it spawns, but you don't really have to worry. You can either target Tazala or Dazar, because all damage that would be dealt to Dazar gets dealt to Tazala instead while he's mounted. They're going to get through with just 2 of those fear AoEs, and they should be pretty much in the clear now. Not too much left that can go wrong. There will be the spears falling from the ceiling once Dazar gets pushed a little bit lower, but besides that, they have dealt with all of the adds and all of the awakened enemies of this boss fight. And they are well ahead of Ethical, who are still working on that bridge towards Shadow Azul.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very clean run by Goosy Bad. Except this one death that they have, they did a very clean run. I mean, at the start, we actually saw Goosy Bad be behind, right? Because Ethical did that pull slightly faster than them. But then with this Machimba room, just falling so far behind, losing so much time, Goosy Bad can definitely be happy about their performance here in King's Rest. While Ethical, they have to consider for the next dungeon. They need to make sure they're not tilting, they're keeping their head in the game and just play better, or stop, at least try to not make those big mistakes that we've seen them do in the Machimba room in the next dungeon here.
Last bit of HP is going down as Goosy Bad is sealing their victory in game number 1 here over Ethical. And overall, like you mentioned, you know, there's always those tipping points in dungeons, and right there as well, Tettles, Ethical really found that point where they just kind of lost it all.
I mean, ultimately, Goosy Bad and Ethical all the way through Machimba's room were incredibly close. I think Ethical just got a little bit antsy with how they wanted to pull Machimba, and then whenever Machimba was active, they got another Entomb come out of those constructs like we're gonna watch in a little bit on the replay, and ultimately that just like causes them a wipe, because then you end up getting a mummy, and it's just like it all falls apart so quickly. But the general strategies that Ethical was doing, they were fairly strong. Goosy Bad also looked like a powerhouse in that matchup, though.
Yeah. And that really goes to show, I mean, how close the series can be, right? When it's just bent on one player, one team making mistakes and falling behind, but past that, being able to stay very close together. So with that King's Rest in the books, we got to start looking ahead at some of these other dungeons as well here, Nagura.
Yeah, what was the
I
other
think they had
ban?
the ban on jump
Are we gonna play the
We'll play
Workshop?
Workshop and we'll play Toldagor.
Okay.
We'll go to 3 games.
Yeah, so Workshop, we've seen Goosy Bad play before. Unfortunately, they had 7 deaths. They did win, though. So they won their game in Workshop with those 7 deaths. They definitely want to make sure they don't have these deaths come in this time around, because in the time trials, Ethical actually was slightly faster compared to Goosy Bad. It was only a 10 seconds difference between those two, and both of them actually running a very similar. In fact, they were running the exact same setup. Both of them playing with 1 Mage Hunter and Demon Hunter. So we'll see how this goes. It can be a very close match between
That's
those
right,
two.
it could be, and as you mentioned, there were just extra deaths there, and it's all about what teams are going to be able to do to capitalize on that one as well, because the deaths that we had in King's Rest there, Tettles, were just too much for Ethical to overcome.
Oh, yeah. I mean, ultimately, Ethical and how they started out the dungeon, just with the Golden Serpent Room, should have set them up in a position to where they are in the lead, just with how Goosy Bad ended up dealing with the casters. Unfortunately, they just weren't able to capitalize on it. I liked how both of the teams ended up playing that obelisk, like the double obelisk together. I think that was fairly unique, and making sure that you do, if you are at least playing Awakened Mobs, making sure that you're getting like significant benefit out of it, like we saw from Goosy Bad and Ethical, then it does make sense. Otherwise, you would just rather play it with the final boss.
Yeah, and again, I think we've seen time and time again where King's Rest runs can just get completely shut down because there is so much pressure for these guys to be able to pull as large as they can and as insane as they possibly can. But Dratus, let's start talking about that workshop as well. Even though we did see Goosy Bad have a bunch of deaths in their first run in Cup play, time trial wise, they were very close together between both these teams.
Yeah, we have a 17-minute time trial time from Goosy Bad in Workshop, and a 16:50 from Ethical, so very close. But notably, Goosy Bad played a mage in their time trial, and then earlier today in their first run on this map, in an earlier match, they played no mage. They decided to play double hunter instead, emulating what teams like Method NA did for their time trials. So it looks like they've kind of adjusted their strategy since the time trial period ended to go back onto that double hunter rather than playing the mage. We'll have to see if Ethical decides to play that mage, or if they are also off of it and back onto something like double hunter.
Yeah, I think, well, at the moment it looks like Ethical is going to stand their ground and keep going with the mage, and I'm always interested to start seeing some of these little compositional differences as well, Tettles, because it seems like they start showing up in very subtle ways as gaining one team an advantage over another.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the difference between Mage and Hunter inside of something like Workshop is probably fairly minor, but in terms of, like, explosive killing power, the Hunter should be better off at killing explosives over something like the Mage. I'm sure the Mage is, like, fairly good. You're able to dump Fire Blasts into the targets and not lose too terribly much damage, especially on, like, a 19 on Tyrannical. You're probably able to, like, one-shot the explosives, but the Hunter is superior at just killing the explosives. It's also a little bit better for stuff like Cujo, where you're able to DPS down around the box a little bit easier. So there may just be something that's like very small, nuanced decisions, like you were stating, that ultimately is the reason that they are making something that is a change.
Yep. And with Workshop getting ready to go, and like I said, they opted to not go with that double hunter onto this one. And what do you think needs to really happen for Ethical to be able to take this one, Nagura? They have very close time trial times between both of these teams. Just capitalizing off of any potential mistakes their opponent's making, or what is it?
I mean, if both of those teams play their time trial time, right, then Ethical is going to win. So I think at this point, Ethical just needs to play their best. As long as they don't tilt because of this first game, they just need to forget about this first game and just play their time trial time. If they do that, they'll win against Goosy Bad, because Goosy Bad had a worse time in time trials and an even worse time earlier today when they had those 7 deaths. So if Ethical just does a clean dungeon, they're probably gonna win. So at this point, they just need to not make any mistakes.
We'll have to see, and it might also be something about
Simple.
Yeah, just don't make mistakes, Tettles.
Yeah, I mean,
Just have your coffee.
it is fairly late for Ethical, to be fair, as well.
Well, it's very early.
Or-
It's actually really early in the morning.
I
So
guess it
that's what I'm
depends.
saying.
Yeah.
These guys are, well, it's 5, 6 in the morning now, something like that. That's how time works, Tettles.
Thanks. Hold on. Let me
You're
open up
welcome.
the.
I do math
Googler.
lessons later.
I'm
I do
in
math lessons later.
Australia.
Okay, go for it. Tell me what you're
8:17
seeing.
a.m.
Yeah, it's really late, Tettles. Yeah.
It's really late if you're a gamer.
Listen, this is not Dratnos time. This is everybody else's time, okay?
Count
And you know what
Dratnos.
and you know what it's also time for? It's time for the game as well. Shocking surprise, I know. But it's also time for us to get ready to go, as the last ready checks are going out. Everyone's jumping around and ready to get set in this instance. And this is also going to be determining whether Ethical is going to be dropping down into that lower bracket or not, as Goosy Bads really wanted to be able, well, both teams really are going to want to be able to meet Method NA in those upper finals. And having to go through the lower bracket, especially when you have to look at complexity limit down there, Dradnos, really hungry to get back, it's going to be kind of scary. It's not where you want to be.
Yeah, you want to try and win as much as you can. And
Thank
losing
you.
is the bad one, so you want to try and avoid that. Back to you, Jack.
What has happened?
Jack is. Thought we thought we got rid of Sloop, but now Dratnos has just turned into Sloop.
I know, right? You've just been studying so much for for the incoming tournament and everything. Game number 2 between Goosy Bad and Ethical is ready to go. Let's dive in, guys.
So we see both teams straight away using their life potion to just engage this trash group faster. We've seen a group earlier already have 2 deaths here. In fact, I think it was Goosy Bad that had 2 deaths here in the very first group. So let's hope they don't have the same mistake again, as Ethical has Chompy drop a little bit low, but now they're finished off the mobs and both teams managed without any
you
deaths.
actually see Goosy Bad there. They decided to not even bother using the hammers to slay those ads. They were just killed them with their own rocket barrage, whereas Ethical killed them with one slam of the hammer. Both very clean strategies. Both took about the same length of time. Really fun pack to fight. As long as you do find a good way for to kill it with either the environment or their own abilities. They're both into this first boss fight here. We have Bloodlust coming out from Goosy Bad. Ethical deciding to sit on it for a little while here. Wonder what we see a combustion coming out as well. Surprised to not see a Bloodlust here active for Ethical, given that mage is combusting.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, we've seen almost all the teams, in fact, every single team so far use Bloodlust here on the boss pool. So I wonder if they want to save the Bloodlust for this difficult pull on the second boss, because a lot of teams have wiped to that trash pull on top of the boss, so maybe they just want to save it for there. And if they get a second use of Bloodlust anyway, they can save it, right? So as long as you don't miss out on a Bloodlust, it's not going to cost
so time
you
trial
much.
time here, 1650. So as long as you lust in the first 5 minutes, really at any time, you'll get it back up at the end of the run, and that is not too bad. Interesting here, we're seeing Shape Mage playing that 2-minute combust build rather than earlier we actually saw a 1-minute combustion with the kindling talent. Shape though is just on this 2-minute strategy, so it's going to be all about optimizing those combustions, doing as much damage as possible with them. And unfortunately, Chomp goes down. Was that to the hammer? I think that might be to the hammer.
I might have been,
I see
yes.
a dead body under where that hammer slammed. Looks like they're not going to commit their battle res here, as this boss is almost over. So they're just gonna get across the finish line without that healer. Goosy Bad though gets a little bit ahead as a result of that, I'd say.
Yeah, this is not going to cost them too much, but it's still going to matter in the grand scheme of things. So they want to make sure Chompy does release immediately after and get back to them as fast as they can. Now, interestingly enough, before Chompy went down, they were pretty even on DPS, even though Ethical did not commit their Bloodlust. So we'll see what they do with their Bloodlust now, because they have to use it at some point here on the maybe next pull or on the boss, because otherwise they're actually going to miss out on one usage.
Yeah, they need it. That Bloodlust is kind of burning a hole in their pocket. They need to find a way to spend it soon, or else they are going to be missing out on a use. Unless their run, I mean, one argument is that, okay, if we miss out on a use, that means our run is really fast, but still, I think that they should be trying to find a way to use that. You'd see a good use there of focusing Iris and I-Beam to execute a bunch of those enemies all at once, and then the Netherwalk coming out as the only target who is being hit by them, so able to immune that. Very good play coming out from Ethical there. They're very quickly able to deal with that. Meanwhile, Goosy Bad pulling even more enemies than Ethical did onto Kujo. Ethical avoided some of those waste processing units, but it looks like, actually this might be, oh yeah, there's definitely multiple of them in there on Goosy Bad's side. This is a lot of enemies to fight at once. They did a good job though of baiting those AoE abilities away from that box. That is going to help them not die, because what you really want to avoid happening is having an AoE ability going off in the entire safe zone back there, because then there is no more safe zone. It's all just dead zone.
Yeah, unfortunately we see a death here on Goosy Bad's side. One of their hunters going down. They do have a battle rest available. They need to use an engineering rest to get him back up. There we go. Did get him back up. And we also saw Ethical use that Bloodlust now for the boss pool. So interesting to see the different usage here in Bloodlust. And you can tell on the boss's HP. I mean, this really seemed like a smart usage of Bloodlust, because on that boss, it seems like a lot more damage they could pull out compared to the other boss. Because again, on the first boss, the damage was really even between the two teams, even though one team committed Bloodlust and the other one didn't. And now on this boss, you can see the damage difference on the boss. On a Tyrannical, 30% on the boss is quite a lot of time. So smart play here by Ethical using that Bloodlust.
Yeah, definitely some of that can be attributed to the Bloodlust. Some of it should also probably go to the fact that Goosy Bad pulled more trash onto the boss, which slows down the boss dying. Some of it might be due to their death, slowing them down as well. And some of it might be due to this Fire Mage blasting away at Kuja's health there, doing tremendous amounts of damage, especially on pull. Really did a good job of also killing all the ads very quickly with that Ignite just spreading around from that combustion. Huge damage coming out from the Mage. They should have a combustion ready for the very next pull as well, I think, if my internal clock is not mistaken.
So one thing that actually went wrong here, unfortunately, with the overlay, so we did the timers didn't actually work from the start on, but the total time is what matters for the difference here. So as long as we look at the total time and the difference between those two teams, we'll still see who wins and who loses. So the death timers are still correct for both teams with the 5 seconds on top, so we're perfectly even here. So no problem to see the winner in the end anyway. But Ethical already down with the boss, while Goosy Bad still working on Cujo here. And Ethical doing this trash pull. Now this gauntlet here is also time gated because you need to finish off the first trash, and then the next trash group will spawn, and then the last mini boss will spawn. So no way of speeding this up.
It looks like Shape is fonting up here, so they are going to use Combustion on the next pull here with the 3 robots. That makes a lot of sense. Those 3 robots are pretty scary with the zaps going out and the AoE, all that stuff. So they're going to try and delete that pack as quickly as possible with that mage's combustion ability. Watch those damage meters here in a second. We are going to see a large number with a blue bar under it. Here it comes.
It looked like the hunter was actually missing his disengage there. If I didn't see it incorrectly. Either way, they did manage to get the hunters now as well to the next trash group on Goosy Bad side as well. Ethical is now down with the second with the 3 big robots, so now they only have the mini boss left. It is not a fortified setting, so the mini bosses don't actually have more HP, so it shouldn't be a big problem for them to finish this off. But this is a big reason why you see so much single target corruption being run specifically in Workshop, because there's just a bunch of single target mobs you have to focus down, and I mean, there's not that much trash you can AoE down, and that's why single target damage is so important. That's why we see the mages, we see the hunters come in for this specific.
It's kind of reminiscent of Upper Karazhan back in Legion.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of cool because Lower Karazhan also kind of analogous to Junkyard, as both wide dungeons with a lot of trash in them.
Back when Starfall still did damage, so I could actually enjoy that dungeon. And now I need a shockbot to do damage for me.
To be fair, everybody needs a shockbot to deal damage for them in that dungeon. Those
True,
shockbots are
yeah.
so good. Ethical making their way now into the Awakened Realm as Goosy Bad are engaging that mini boss. So Goosy Bad about 1 mini bosses behind in terms of time. Maybe call that a minute or so.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see that both of the teams only had 1 death so far, and both of the deaths seemed like they didn't cost them too much time. I mean, Chumpy going down at the end of the first boss, while maybe the Hunter death on Goosy Bad side during the second boss was a little bit of a bigger time loss compared to Ethical, but still, it really seems like Ethical's strat is slightly faster compared to theirs. And again, in the time trials, they were only 10 seconds faster, and it definitely seems more than 10 seconds difference now between those two
Definitely they've opened up a large lead here, but they do have to be careful because there's definitely the potential for big wipes to happen in this area. It looks like they are going to be doing trash with the boss. By pulling the boss, that's going to pull the other 4 people in the group out of the Awakened Realm and into the real world, and they're now going to have to deal with all this trash and the boss at once. But once again, they do have a combustion available, and that combustion should be doing huge damage to both the boss and everything near it. You can see the mage just shooting up on the damage meters as everything just melts.
Yeah, and explosive can also be a huge problem here, as you see the beam spawn at the same time and some of the trash staying behind because they just don't move as quickly as the tank is moving, and then you can have explosive spawn in the back, and then it can be difficult for everyone to finish off the explosives because only the ranged can attack them. So lots of problems here in this specific pull, but they pulled it off pretty perfectly here in Ethical side, with the help of the mage. Now, Goosy Bad, they don't have the mage. They still have a lot of AoE damage with the hunters, but it's definitely going to last them. It's going to take them a little bit longer to finish up the trash compared to Ethical.
They actually spent a little bit of time fighting that trash before pulling the boss rather than just going right into all of it at once. Ooh, lots of damage going out here. That is rough with Grievous as well. They are luckily able to get inside a shield generator, and that should help prevent the worst of it from being too lethal, although they now need to flee as there are laser beams coming their way from the middle of the room.
Yeah, they also have the magic debuffs, as you can see, one of them being on the Demon Hunter here on Goosy Bad's side, and one of them was on Hunter on the Mistweaver before, and 2 now on the Hunters as well. Those debuffs can be pretty dangerous, specifically because the healer just doesn't have all of the dispels to get rid of them. Does have Revival to clear them all at once, but it was still on cooldown here at the start of combat, so couldn't use the revival to get rid of them. On top of Grievous, definitely dangerous, but they now finish off the trash as well on Goosy Bad's side, so now they only have the boss left. But Ethical already on 13%.
Yeah, Ethical pretty far ahead here. They've got maybe, they're ahead by 45% of the boss's health. So they've opened up a lead, but not enough of a lead that they can wipe safely. If they wipe, they are probably once again behind. So they need to be really careful in the rest of this dungeon, but they do have a lead. They're going to move on now to fighting these two patrolling robots. Let's see if they target the one that is further back. And you can see, absolutely they do. The skull marker goes out on one of these two tanks. That one is the farther back spawning one is the one that starts the timer for the little helicopter to come pick you up. So it's good to kill that one a little bit before the other one so that you can, not be inefficient and just sitting around waiting for that helicopter to show up after you're out of combat.
Yeah, so one thing to note is that Goosy Bad is actually slightly ahead in trash compared to Ethical before they killed off those spider tanks. So maybe Goosy Bad can make up sub time later on because they don't have to pull as much trash as Ethical has to. But there's really not that much trash that you can skip because at this stage there's only this last bridge left to the boss and the awaken mobs you deal with. So they still have to do one pull no matter what. And if you can't save a whole pull, if you only pull slightly less, but do the same amount of pulls, you don't actually save that much time.
Yeah, so they fought extra waste processing unit with Cujo, and that is going to mean that they can cut a defense spot from the pull that you can see Ethical doing right now. But as you said, that's not actually going to save all that much time. It's not necessarily, it's probably time neutral in the end because they had to kill an extra enemy.
Yeah.
They made an earlier pull bigger and they made a later pull smaller. They didn't actually change the amount of pulls they're doing in the dungeon, which is the big way that you save time in Mythic Plus.
We actually saw a bunch of things from Beyond spawn here, unfortunately, at the same time for the mage, but didn't manage to, didn't cause any sort of problems, especially because you can use the damage reduction here in this shield as well for the thing from Beyond damage. But you see everyone having Grievous stacks, Chumpy, making sure everyone stays alive, as Goosy Bad now also is moving on to this last bridge, but still just a little bit behind at this point. Now, there's still a lot of things that can go wrong, especially on this last boss when they pull the awaken mobs with the boss. We've seen other teams already wipe, and we've seen people have deaths there. It is a very dangerous pull with the awaken mobs, so we'll see how Ethical does this now.
Looks like Goosy Bad are just going to be going over on count here because they have pulled those robots anyways, so they're just going to be over 100%. A little bit interesting. Maybe they just decided it would be faster to not bother melding off those waste processing units earlier. It's always a little bit strange when a team comes up with a route that gives you more than 100% trash count, because that's usually indicates that you're pulling something you didn't need to. Ethical, though, pulling something they absolutely do need to. It is the last boss with 3 awakened enemies. So we've got the Fear Guy, the Tank Buster, the Blob, and of course King Mechagon and his array of inventions up against Ethical.
So Ethical actually needed to wait a little bit here because their Bloodlust was still on cooldown. So it actually cost them anyway that they used their cooldown, their Bloodlust on the second boss instead of the first. So that meant they actually had to stand there, wait for almost 20 seconds actually before they engaged the boss because they didn't have the Bloodlust and they needed to be able to deal with these awakened mobs. This means that Goosy Bad, now skipping some of the trash mobs before this boss with the Hunters, Disengage, and Feign Death, they're actually now so much closer than it looked up until this point.
Yeah, we were talking about how that Bloodlust was, may have made sense, but it looks like it is going to come back to bite Ethical here to the tune of 20 seconds, and that is a large price to pay in a tournament where games have already been decided by less than 20 seconds multiple times today.
Most definitely, and I think on a boss like this, overall, I mean, depending how long the boss fight takes, the Hunter damage might just overcome the Mage damage, right? Mage does have huge burst windows with the combustion, but if you have a bad kill time, if the boss dies right as your combustion comes back up, then the Hunter more consistent damage is definitely going to be overall better. So we'll see which team manages to pull off this fight, but at this point it still seems like Ethical is quite a bit ahead as they have 30% on this aerial.
Yeah, that combustion is so effective on pull against these awakened enemies. I'd say that might be Fire Mage's biggest strength this season, is just how much it melts those awakened enemies on pull. And you can see, even though we've been out of combustion for more than a minute now, Shape is still atop those damage meters based purely on the strength of that opener with that combustion. Hugely powerful cooldown, and it looks like based on this timing, he's going to get another one against this Omega Buster, and that is what they are looking for. That's part of why Fire Mage has been showing up so much in these workshop time trials in the North American realm is because of these Tyrannical boss timings.
Yeah, so interesting to see that Goosy Bad actually chose to switch away from the mage that they were playing in the time trials, and now Ethical sticking to that mage, really just pulling off this damage here and just pulling ahead on this last boss fight, even though it is a lot closer than we thought it is. But Ethical already on Omega Buster here, 82%, while Goosy Bad just now finishing off the aerial unit. Both of them having 1 death, so it's the exact same timer here.
Oh, unfortunately, Shape is gonna drop the Rune of Power and immediately gets a magnet thrown on it. That is not what you like to see for any aspiring fire mages out there. Really want to try and avoid having any mechanics show up on your Rune of Power. Extremely unlucky there for old Shape. They're gonna be alright though. It looks like they're still a solid 40% ahead on Omega Buster health. Both teams have the same death penalty here, so no extra calculation needing to come into play there. It will just be who kills King Mechagon first. And right now, it is Ethical's to lose. They are doing well on the damage check. Their DPS is looking strong, and they got here first. So that's 3 good things.
That's definitely 3 good things, and it really looks like we're gonna see the first game 3 out of this NA and Oceanic region here, because it really looks like Ethical is gonna finish off this boss first, making the series a 1-1, and then we're actually going to see the last game, which we haven't seen at all today.
Yeah, these games, this will be our first non-2-0 series. Really exciting to see that. But I'm glad we're going to get to see more of these teams in action, because they have both been so close, and they've had they've been so competitive with each other that I think it's going to be a great match for us to spend a little bit more time in today.
As they now finish up the boss, and it's going to be a 1-1 once they finish off King Mechagon as he's flying in here, and we'll see a 3rd game. Very close matchup between Goosy Bad and Ethical.
Manages to bring it back and tie up the series in our upper semis, and as you mentioned, just avoiding those mistakes, and also let's look at this as well, Tettles. The speed at which they were able to complete this run, I believe we're right on point, or right around on point with where they were at for time trials.
Yeah, exactly. They're at a very similar spot in which they were on time trials. In addition to that, I think that the biggest advantage is just how they did Cujo with all of that trash. It is explosive, so you are kind of scared about how all of that works, but making sure that you're utilizing the strengths of the Fire Mage there with all of those mobs that you are in fact able to pull right on top of the boss immediately, getting all of that cleave that comes out with that combustion is very important, and just Ethical's use in taking advantage of it, I think that really set them apart between Team Goosy Bad, and it kind of makes you ask yourself, why did Goosy Bad swap off of that mage?
Oh, I mean, go for it.
Sometimes when you're playing one of these tournaments and you see Method NA has a different team comp than you, you're like, oh, all right, that's probably the comp we should be running, and you just swap to it. I don't know. I've certainly done that before. It's tough to avoid the allure of whatever comp Method NA ran, but I agree. The mage looked really strong here. The thing about the mage is it does need to be catered to, right? Like, if things go a little bit wrong, and then that is a lot worse for the mage comp than it is for the comp without the mage, because then you're sitting there with your font expiring and the combustion gets all bad, and that's the kind of thing that maybe the double hunter is better at, right? Is recovering from things going slightly wrong.
Yeah, and I just got official confirmation that the time for Ethical was 16:51. Our timers were a little bit off mid-game, but they pulled through with a 16:51 time. So you absolutely love to see that. I mean, Nagura, as you mentioned, just play your time trial time and you'll be set.
Exactly. I mean, they only had 1 death, which didn't really cost them so much time at all. And yeah, 1 second slower as they were in the time trials, and that's it. That's all they had to do. They listened to me and they won.
We gotta start listening to you more now after this.
Yeah, I think so. Especially since Tettles is always wrong.
That's also very true. We gotta make sure we keep that in mind. Right, Tettles? Right, buddy? Right, buddy? I think I'm facing Tettles. I actually can't tell for sure. Anyway, walk us through a little bit of this replay, Tettles. If you're still alive.
Well, Jack, thanks for asking. So the first and most important thing that Ethical actually did is it was that pull into Cujo that I was initially talking about. They ended up holding their Bloodlust for a really long time, which I heard on the cast they were not really sure if it was going to be to the advantageous or not, but ultimately I think that's where they gained a lot of their lead, was just how they pulled a bunch of that trash into Cujo. In addition to that, Goosy Bad did something really weird with their count, and I'm pretty sure they went over count. I don't know where they got too much, because Workshop is one of those dungeons that's so straightforward that it's really easy to get just 100% count on the dot. But I'm trying to I don't really understand why they went over count as much as they did. But ultimately, I think Ethical just did a really good job of not only taking the trash into Cujo, but they also took the trash into Spark Flux, which was fairly important, and took that and used that Fire Mage and Combustion on all those obelisks as well. And ultimately, it was just the Combustion and immense amount of burst damage and free cleave that the Fire Mage brought that propelled Ethical to be able to take that match.
Yeah, without question. Thanks so much for that. And that brings us as well to Game 3, which is, like we mentioned, the first time we've had Game 3 in the NA so far. And it's also going to be the first time, Drados, that we're going to be seeing some Dagor action.
Yeah, for the crimes of failing to 2-0 the other team, these teams have been sentenced to a run of Dagor.
They are imprisoned.
No.
They're just, no, not Dagor. But here they are in the prison.
Somewhere Trell is screaming.
Yeah, and not just Dagor. This Dagor has a set of affixes that are really something. The active affixes here are Tyrannical, Bolstering, and Explosive.
That's just mean.
Why?
People voted for that one on Twitter, right? That was a Twitter.
Was it the Twitter poll? I think it might have. I mean, it sounds punishing enough that it could be the Twitter poll. So, if you guys don't know, every week we decide to have a Twitter poll to decide how much we would like to punish the MDI players. And I believe, was it this one? Actually, I think it was Mechagon. That
was Twitter Junkyard?
Yeah,
that
it was Junkyard.
Also ended up being Tyrannical Bolstering.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, same
yes.
affix
Bolstering,
is
yeah.
different dungeon. This is the one they naturally chose.
When do you think the Blizzard's going to start allowing teams to vote for the easiest of affixes? Like, they have to vote between whether or not they want Skittish and Volcanic or Teaming and Quaking.
I'm just saying to organize it, you know? This is your time to shine as a tournament organizer, Tettles.
I'm not a tournament organizer. Please don't put that power on me. I am uniquely not qualified for that.
Why did you put Bolstering in Dagor?
Come on, Tettles.
Titles?
Okay.
Thank you, Tettles.
Please do not put those
Thank you,
demons on me.
Tettles.
Do not spread false rumors that I have any control or power over what affixes any of these players get, because the last thing I want is angry tweets from Now and JB blaming me for forcing them into some terrible dungeon.
Hashtag thanks, Tettles.
Yeah, thanks, Tettles. Can we get into thanks, Tettles?
Thanks, Titles.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I'm just saying, you're responsible, and it's only you onto that one, so...
Why not?
It's okay. Have you already walked out of the room? Now I just hear that you're, like, in another
closing my
part.
door. My cat decided that it was time to leave, and he's figured out how to open and close this door, so I had to close it again.
He was like, no, I don't want to go to Dagor. Take me anywhere else.
Oh, no. Well, for game number 3, this is also going to be deciding who is going on to square up against Method NA in the upper finals. Losers are going to drop down and await till tomorrow, really. They're going to have some free time to be able to get themselves practiced up and await some of the opponents that we have in our lower bracket series as well. So, Dagor coming up, and just like we've seen a lot of times previously, Freehold especially, we started seeing a lot of hunters, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of the same in this one, Dranos.
Yeah, Bolstering really shuts down the Death Knight potential, so we start seeing these hunters just being this jack-of-all-trades DPS who's really good at the single target and able to handle pretty much any sized pull, which you need to do pulls of all different sizes when you're in a Bolstering dungeon because of the restrictions of the affix.
Yeah, we saw it on Freehold, like we said, and we're going to be seeing a lot of it again until Dagor, and I think it's also going to help quite considerably for a lot of the moves that teams are going to really be looking to make as well for dealing with any of the cannons. I mean, having that binding shot should be extremely good. So let's dive in right now, guys, for game number 3 to see who moves on.
So we see both teams immediately use their Shroud here to be able to self-pass some of the mobs, but now we see a big pull coming out from both of those teams. Now, let's see if they can deal with all of those explosives coming in and the bolstering.
Yeah, this is a lot of explosives spawning all at once. Those rogues are going to be basically just AFK tab targeting or, clicking on those explosives, and that is their one job here, while the Hunter's job is going to be AoEing down and handling when there are huge amounts of explosives all at once. Mistweavers are able to handle a little bit of explosives as long as they come out during the Way of the Crane, then it's really not too bad. But once that Way of the Crane is expired, any extra explosives that start to go off can start to really overwhelm the entire group's defenses here.
Yeah, so the bolstering management for a pull like this is so important. The better you deal with bolstering, the faster you're going to do this pull, especially at the very end, because you have a bunch of mobs here that have more HP than the others. You have the crabs and you also have the crocolisks. So some of them have a little bit more HP and you want to make sure that you kill them as evenly as possible. Now Ethical managed to finish this trash pull slightly faster, and they're already engaging the boss now. They used their bloodlust. They also committed their bloodlust
in the final 10 seconds of the trash pull. I wonder if that's going to be based on boss timings. That's going to let them get optimal uptime on on the boss. Yeah, really cool strategy there coming out from Ethical. Meanwhile, Goosy Bad have decided it's time to kill some more of the trash around this area. That's going to make it safer for them to fight the boss, and it's going to advance their enemy forces bar a little bit. So Ethical probably planning to pull a little bit more in the prison instead.
So I like this pull here by Goosy Bad as they were pulling some of the crabs, and then at the very end, when they were low HP, they pulled some more trash on top with much less
parasites.
HP here. So the parasites, exactly, because those have the very little HP. So pulling it on top at the very last second here, when they were already when they were as low as 5 to 10%, really works for them. But still taking quite a bit of time to finish off this pull here, as Ethical is already in 40% on this.
Yeah, even a miscalculation of a few percentages on the health of when you pull things in with bolstering active really gets magnified by that affix, and it ends up making many seconds extra at the end of the pull as you clean up something that, might only have 5% health but has a million hit points at that point based on just how the bolstering affix works. So yeah, we can see Ethical, they have done one fewer trash pull, but they are going to finish this boss very, very soon compared to Goosy Bad, and they will be on their way into the rest of the dungeon. They will need to find 8 extra percent though somewhere else that Goosy Bad does not need to get. Goosy Bad popping their lust as soon as the Sand Queen re-emerges there. That is going to be an efficient boss bloodlust. Should help them recoup some of this time on the boss fight. Meanwhile, Ethical, their lust was used a minute, almost 2 minutes ago. So that'll be back up a little bit sooner.
Yeah, so definitely some different pulls and different last timers coming in from both of those teams, as Ethical does finish off the boss now. Now, it is a tyrannical environment, so a lot of these bosses are pretty dangerous in Dagor. Sand Queen does do a lot of AoE damage when the Sandstorm comes in, plus the upheaval. Now, most of the players here can get rid of the upheaval with Vanish, with Shadow Melt, with a lot of other abilities after with the cloak and so on. So they shouldn't really get hit by the upheaval at all. You can also leap it as a warrior as well. So upheaval shouldn't be a big deal, but you have the crabs to deal with and the Sandstorm, as I mentioned before, so still a lot of damage on everyone. Well, Ethical is already doing another trash pull.
Yeah, gotta be careful with bolstering in this area. Some of these enemies have slightly different amounts of health, so they need to make sure they are prioritizing enemies correctly here. Really tragic if something dies early, or if any enemies get added into the pull late, which can happen pretty easily in Dagor. One of the reasons that bolstering Dagor is so challenging is that as you start getting into the prison, many of these enemies will flee when they get low on health. And then they will go and pull more of their friends in, and then they will put 5 stacks of bolstering on their friends, and then those friends will kill you. And that is bad.
Then they're not friends anymore, as they kill you with 10 bolstering stacks on them. We see one more thing that is actually really nice with Shadow Melt is that if something like this happens, you can actually just Shadow Melt off the aggro. If you have a full HP mob with 5 bolstering stacks, it's much easier to just de-aggro the mob, make sure it resets, the bolstering stacks get removed by Shadow Melting, and then engage it again. So if something goes bad, they do have this Shadow Melt, getting out of jail free card basically in case something does happen, but it only works once every 3 minutes, and then you have to, then you can't really do it anymore. So hopefully nothing like that happens, as they also can save their stance, to be honest, when the mobs drop low, or drop a binding shot as well, as they have 2 hunters, to make sure those mobs maybe don't run away and pull anything else.
So we see Goosy Bad actually skipped that trash pull that Ethical did. They're going right into Nihilotha here, fighting the Blood of the Corruptor, and they're going to skip pretty much this entire area as they make their way further up into the prison. Ethical, after dealing with some trash in that area, and I think getting access to those buffs as well, which Goosy Bad did not get. They are now going to engage that same Blood of the Corruptor with some extra enemy forces count. Looks like Ethical has certainly got a little bit of a lead here, right? Because they have the buffs. they're fighting the same mob and they have more enemy health or more enemy forces done. So I think it's fair to say Ethical has an advantage at this point in the run.
Yeah, and so one thing to note about this Awaken mob here, those tentacles that fixate you the eyes, they actually, they will snap to, well, not really snap, but they will spawn closer to the blood if you are out of sight, line of sight, or out of range. So that's why you can see them, just ignore them for a while, they move on with the blood, they wait until they spawn closer, as you can see for Goosy Bad side right now, and then they finish them off. Goosy Bad definitely doing a good job here, but this is taking quite a while for them to drag this blood up. So definitely a little bit of time lost here in Goosy Bad's side.
Yeah, Goosy Bad has placed their portal in a kind of standard place. Ethical has a new place, though, for their portal exit to be. And they are just going right into this later pull in the area, skipping one of those earlier ones. This is an interesting place there. Definitely looked very deliberate where they brought that Blood of the Corrupted to. And one of the most awesome things about that Awakened Affix is the ability to just use those boss death portals and place them wherever you want. Really opens up a lot of extra options for groups like this, and that I think Ethical is using that to great effect here. I think they've got a really cool pull here. I can't wait to see what they do about that trash in the other side there. Maybe they're just never going to pull it. Maybe they'll pull it with the boss in the second part of the boss fight. I don't know. It's a mystery. We're going to find out soon.
One thing that's pretty annoying about this pull that we just saw Ethical do is that there's actually a warden inside this trash group that already has very low HP, which can cause some problems with bolstering, because you do want to deal with the warden because it does so much damage, but you don't want to necessarily kill it immediately, because then it will bolster all the other mobs immediately, and it will just cause you to lose a lot of time. And that's why Ethical actually managed to keep it alive for quite a long time, with their tanks surviving also for quite a long time without using the shield wall, only used last stand here, so well done by them. Goosy Bad now also engaging this very same trash pull.
You bring up a great point, because it's not just about being able to survive the pull, it's also about being able to survive the pull and keep the cooldowns that you know you need for the next pull. So, you know, you can't just commit your shield wall if you know if you have decided that you're going to need it for the next pull already. Sometimes, you know, it's obviously better than dying to do that, and then you have to try and come up with a new solution for the next pull. But that's a big thing about these MDI pulls, is finding a way to reliably do it so that you will have the same cooldowns available that you're relying on in the next pull.
Exactly, and both of those teams have been doing some very clean pulls so far. I mean, Ethical is slightly ahead in trash percentage, 6%, but both of them are now fighting just Howlis. And again, because of this bolstering environment, we don't see any of those pulls that we usually see here in this dungeon, where you pull just Howlis through the gate, on the other side, you just pull it with a bunch of trash on top, but that doesn't really work if you have bolstering. So that's why we see them clear all this trash and just deal with just Howlis the normal way without having any trash on top. It is also Tyrannical, so boss fights do take quite some time, but both pretty close together as you look at the percentage. They're very
just
close.
Crowd controlling that pull that they skipped earlier. I wonder if they're going to pull it in towards the end of this boss fight. That's the strategy we've seen some teams doing with bolstering, where you pull some enemies in at the end of the boss fight, and then you don't have to worry about them bolstering the boss because they die at the same time as the boss. That is because we saw those blinds and the paralysis going out on the enemies that they skipped earlier with that awakened portal. Huge amounts of AoE coming out here. You might be worried about bolstering here, but you don't need to be, because all the enemies that the boss actually breaks out of the portals themselves do not bolster. However, I did see, I think, one bolstering explosion going out there, so they may have had one arsonist in there that did indeed bolster on death. That is true.
Critic actually going down, unfortunately, on Goosy Bad's side. They had a lot of explosives spawn. There's a little bit of RNG here, because there's so many mobs from the boss. They do not bolster, but they do spawn explosives, unfortunately. And that's why one of the hunters actually went down. They do have a battle rest. They got him back up immediately. And they're still ahead in boss HP percentage, if you look at their health on Goosy Bad's side. And this trash difference, again, like sometimes the trash difference doesn't really matter as much. If you don't have to do one extra pull, if you just pull slightly more trash on each of your pulls, but it's the same number of pulls compared to their team, then you might not actually end up losing anything. Of course, we saw Ethical do a little bit of an extra trash pull at the start, and maybe that's why they have this extra percentage from. Goosy Bad now finishing off just Howlis at the same time as Ethical as well.
Yeah, but Ethical does have that trash advantage now, 10% on trash. They are going to it looks like they're just going to run through and meld up at the top of the next obelisk here, if I had to guess. Out come the Lightfoots, and they are just yeeting on through here, not stopping for anything. They're probably going to use, Ring of Peace there, knocks those enemies back, and here comes those 5 melds and or vanishes or feign deaths. That will drop combat, and they will pick the lock and enter Nyalotha. Ooh, they're not even going to enter Nyalotha. They're going to Shroud. They have decided that they will be fighting Samrek with Overseer Korgus. That is exciting. That is something that I have not seen yet. Goosy Bad taking a slightly more conservative option. They are going to be fighting Samrek now and not have to deal with it with Overseer Korgus. It's going to be slower but safer out of Goosy Bad, so there's an opportunity now for Ethical to end up paying the price for this decision later. They're going to go right into their cannon pull now, though. You can see Skylark going in, pulling a bunch of enemies from inside, and he's just going to group them up while Arrow gets ready to shoot that cannon and blow them all up at once. They have to be very, very disciplined here because Bolstering is active, and Bolstering can be really bad here if you end up bolstering something. You know, even a couple of bolstering stacks that get spread around early can do nasty things to how long it takes this pack to die.
Yeah, this is so crucial. This whole cannon area is going to be crucial for both of those teams because, as you mentioned, of the bolstering affix. I mean, all of those cannons only have 5 shots, so even without bolstering, you want to make sure that you hit all of the mobs that you pulled with all of the cannon shots to kill them as evenly as possible.
Here.
But bolstering making it even more difficult.
All those blazes reflected
back
on
them.
A
lot of damage.
Huge amounts of damage. Yeah, I was thinking that you would maybe your earlier point about everybody just melding and dropping combat with these things would have maybe been valuable, but their melds are actually all on cooldown, so they're just going to have to beat through all this extra
because
health.
of the skip, yeah.
And they do have that spell reflect available, which is handily going to, you know, take advantage of the mob's own increased damage against them. Goosy Bad having a much less clean-looking pull here. They're not fighting in that doorway. They are going to fight in this corner here. Although everything is getting nice and grouped, this is actually going to work out well for them just as well. They need to handle those explosives.
Binding shot actually really nice for this specific cannon pull because you just have a double binding shot, making sure the mobs don't move once they are gathered. But you see some of the mobs actually bolstering pretty high, and they had some problems with explosive as well because if you're inside the cannon, you still get all of the damage from the explosives and from the mobs, and that's why you usually have rogues here, because the rogues will use their tricks of the trade to aggro the tank, so they don't get the hits from the ranged attacks, but you still get hit by the explosives, so they need to leave the cannon, use their cloak, go back in, make sure they don't die to them. We see 2 deaths actually come in on Goosy Bad's side because those mobs were so highly bolstered, and they don't have
they
their
were
shadow meld
officers, so they had
available.
true sight, so you couldn't even trick them by melding next to them. And so that's really unfortunate. Great news for Ethical that their 2 bolstered mobs were Flamecasters by contrast, where they got to use that spell reflect to help kill them.
Yeah.
And they didn't have true sight if they did want to use their meld ability. That is really, really rough for Goosy Bad. They are recovering though. They are going to be okay. They still have an opportunity in this dungeon. They have killed extra awakened enemy, so that does mean that their last boss fight will be easier. Ethical certainly could still be in trouble against Overseer Korgus with Samrek. That is something that we have yet to see, I think, anybody attempt in the MDI.
I think Method EU actually did that in the EU Cup last weekend, but they also pulled the boss in a different direction, and they were just immuning through the fear. But it definitely was a very difficult pull that we saw Method EU do, because Korgus is just a boss where all of the awakened mobs are very hard to deal with because you can't really move because of that effect that the boss has that you do get stunned the more you move. So if you get feared, or you get feared into a cannon blast, you get feared into an explosive burst, you get feared, and you just get stunned at the same time. So definitely very difficult to deal with the awakened mobs on Korgus.
Yeah, really something that, you know, if we've seen Method EU do it, that's one thing, but there's a long list of strategies that Method EU and only Method EU have ever successfully executed.
True.
So Ethical gonna try and attempt to remove one strategy from that list, but it will not be an easy feat. They will have to do their best there. They will have Bloodlust available though for Overseer Korgus, so they will have a good shot at it. They are certainly in the lead here, but it is by no means over due to how difficult that last boss fight is going to be for them.
Yeah, and we saw just how crucial this whole cannon era here was, with Goosy Bad losing so much time because of these officers getting bolstered, because one shot just didn't hit the officers properly, and then you have all of these bolstering stacks, can't use the Shadow Meld because of the true side, and just everything falling apart. And now we see this pull here, the second cannon pull that they're doing, also seems to not work out that well for them. The Ring of Peace not really working out for them, as they didn't gather them all up, and now we're probably going to see some bolstering stacks come out again.
This is really rough. Yeah, the Ring of Peace, Ethical had a completely different way that they did this Ring of Peace, and it ended up working fairly well. Unfortunately, Goosy Bad have a couple of enemies that are just refusing to cooperate and group up, and that is really not something that you can live with Bolstering active. You can't just be like, all right, we'll deal with the last 40% of this enemy's health later, because it's not going to be, it's going to be millions and millions of health from a very lethal and angry enemy.
They did manage to get most of the mobs down here, though. They only have one Mariner here, which they can finish off as long as the Prot Warrior outranges those shoot casts, because they're probably going to do a lot of damage. They did manage to finish it off now, so now they're also fighting Captain Valeri, but Ethical already done with this boss. They are a whole boss ahead on a tyrannical environment.
They have backtracked to activate the obelisk and fight the tank buster here. They're going to use that to make a Nyloth portal, maybe to this cannon where they will secure the rest of their count. Maybe they'll just go straight to the last boss. I don't know. This is nice, though, to not have the tank buster, because the tank buster has that AoE circle, and the AoE circle extremely punishing with that Heartstopper Venom on Overseer Korgus, because you're just trying to run away from the AoE circle and getting so much of that poison building up in your veins. Makes it so hard to not get stunned.
Definitely. Yeah, you definitely don't want to have that. I mean, you can probably CD through one of the Dark Furies, just use their cloak or use their turtles, but they already need the turtle and the cloak to get rid of the fear from the other Awaken mobs, so definitely want to make sure they get rid of this one. And now we see the last cannon pull they have to do to get the last few percentages they need, on top of also getting the percentage from the Awaken mob. And we see the bubble come out here on the Prot Word, so he can gather them all up, and now we see the binding shots come out.
A lockdown may have connected with Skylark there, which is really rough ability. That was, I think, what prompted the Life Cocoon to be used, which means it's not going to be available on pull for them against Overseer Korgus. Hopefully that wasn't too crucial a part of their strategy against that boss. As you can see, they are getting ready to engage that last boss fight. They have Bloodlust available, they have most of their cooldowns available, but then, again, not that Life Cocoon. All their offensive abilities, they're pretty much ready here.
So one more problem about this Korgus fight with the Awaken mob is that the pillars are actually all spread around this room, and this room just is not accessible in the middle. So if you have one of those Awaken mobs spawned all the way in the left, it will cost them a lot of time to actually get there, and you can't DPS them until then. That's why you actually see them pull Korgus on top of the pillar with the Void Weaver here, and now they're using the Bloodlust. So this is going to be super important for them to finish off this pull, because there's the Fear mob that will cause them to, if they get feared into one of those abilities, they'll just die. So they want to make sure they focus it down immediately.
Yeah, this is really rough, but they are doing pretty good damage here. It looks like that Spider caster is going to be the first one down. The Fear one, not actually their focus.
Wow.
They are...
Probably because it didn't spawn there, so they couldn't really focus it.
Yeah,
from
they'll
the start.
now be shooting that thing. They do have a lot of ways to deal with it, though. They have the revival for the first one, and then they have their own individual immunities for the second one. So it's really only the third one where it'll start to be too much of a problem, and it looks like it is dying there well in time. Now just Korgus left.
Jumpy Dispel? Okay. That was close. I thought Jumpy did not have a Dispel for himself there, but did manage to get the fear off, so now they only have Korgus left. Now they're just going to be lucky to not get a lot of doubles, a lot of explosive doubles in a row, because this boss on a tyrannical setting is still very difficult to deal with, even if you don't have Awaken mobs. So we'll see how Chompy handles this as we see some of the explosive bursts come
Feign
up.
Death, they're going to be used to stop that Deadeye cast from going out, but one problem with using Feign Death like that is that it sometimes causes the boss's cast sequence to get a little bit more hostile. That might cause there to be some more explosive bursts in this team's future. We already saw an immediate double cast of explosive bursts after that. For those wondering what a double is, it's when Overseer Korgus does 2 explosive bursts between every cross ignition rather than just 1, and it represents a tremendous amount of extra damage on the group here.
So you see explosive cast going out again. Now, thankfully, the Mystery Verse is not actually considered a range. Now, usually the explosive verse favors ranged targets, so the hunters will get every single explosive burst, and the third explosive burst will go on either the healer, the rogue, or the tank. So thankfully Mystery Verse not actually counting as a ranged DPS, because if you have 3 ranged DPS, all of those 3 will always get every single one, and it's so much more difficult to constantly heal 3 targets than to only heal 2 targets and the other one just rotating between the melee and the healer.
That lets you use more players' defensives against the ability, right? If the rogue is getting targeted, then Cloak of Shadows and Feint suddenly start being used effectively, whereas if the rogue is just never targeted, then you don't get any value from those abilities, and it means you have more healing to do over the course of the fight. It does look like, though, Ethical
Exactly.
have their 100% trash count. They have Overseer Corgus dead to rights here. That means that they should be taking home this win here, barring something ridiculous happening in the last 3% of this boss fight.
Wow, and what a clean run by Ethical here. They recovered so well after losing this first game and actually have a reverse sweep here against Goosy Bad as they finish
That's
off.
right,
Corgus.
Ethical coming from behind, making up for any of those earlier errors and pulling off a flawless Dagor run, at least when it comes down to deaths and Tettles. That's really what we want to be able to see out of these Oceania guys. The coffee's brewing, they're getting themselves ready to go, and